Greetings, my wonderful students, and we continue on with our study of the Jefferson era, a time of conflict. Now, in the late 1700s, many U.S. merchants began to sail to China, India, South America, Africa, and the lands along the Mediterranean Sea. They did this as part of a profitable international trade. And in the mid-1790s, a war between France and Britain became an opportunity for American merchants. British and French forces would capture each other's ships because of the war, and many of their merchants began to stay home to avoid capture. So this allowed U.S. merchants to increase their trade, and by 1800 the United States had almost 1,000 merchant ships trading around the world. Now, pirates from the Barbary states of North Africa, Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, and Tunis made trade along the Mediterranean Sea dangerous. The Barbary pirates demanded tribute or payment from European countries to allow safe passage. The European countries often paid this because they felt it was less expensive to pay the tribute than it would be to go to war with the pirates. The Barbary states demanded tribute from the United States as well, and the U.S. paid in the early years because it did not yet have a good enough navy to defend itself. In 1801, the ruler of Tripoli demanded more money for tribute, but Jefferson refused, and Tripoli declared war on the United States. The U.S. Navy had built up since the Revolution and was more effective. U.S. naval forces blockaded Tripoli with help from Swedish forces that were already at war with Tripoli. In 1804, pirates seized the U.S. warship the Philadelphia and put the crew in jail. U.S. forces, led by Stephen Decatur, snuck into the guarded harbor and burned the Philadelphia to prevent it from being used by Tripoli against the U.S. The war ended with a treaty in 1805. Tripoli agreed to stop demanding tribute, but the U.S. did have to pay $60,000 to get their captured sailors back. The U.S. still paid tribute to the other Barbary states until 1815. Now, France and Britain went to war in 1803. And the U.S. did not take sides. By not taking sides, the U.S. had neutral rights, meaning it could trade freely with both sides as long as it wasn't supporting the war. Now, by 1805, France and Britain were trying to block each other's trade with the U.S. and other countries. Each side said they would search and seize ships going to the other country. So the British desperately needed sailors for the war, and many of theirs had deserted. The British Navy began stopping American ships to search for British deserters and force them to return to British service in a policy called impressment. While some of the sailors taken away were deserters, but many also were Americans. So, in effect, the British were kidnapping American sailors and forcing them into the British Navy. In 1807, the British ship, the Leopard, stopped the American ship, the Chesapeake, and demanded to search it. Well, the American captain refused, and the British opened fire, killing 3 crew members. Many Americans wanted war, but President Jefferson wanted to avoid that. Congress passed the Embargo Act in 1807, which prohibited or banned trade between the U.S. and all foreign countries. They were trying to prevent trade with the U.S. and Britain, but they banned all trade so people couldn't trade other countries to get around the ban. For example, if they were trying to trade to Spain, and then Spain would trade to Britain, well, that still gets around the ban, so in order to prevent that, they just banned trading with everything. This act was a disaster and hurt the U.S. economically. Unemployment rose because merchants could no longer sail the seas and trade stuff. The South couldn't sell its tobacco or its cotton, and the price of wheat, which the farmers had been selling, fell. Britain just bought goods from other countries. So in 1809, the Embargo Act was repealed and replaced with another law that just banned trade with France and Britain. But that didn't work well either. The election of 1808. Jefferson, following Washington's example, did not run for a third term. The Democratic Republicans nominated James Madison, father of the Constitution, and the Federalists nominated Charles Pinckney. Pinckney carried most of New England, but not much else, and Madison won the presidency easily. In 1810, Congress passed a law that would allow trade with either Britain or France, depending on which of them lifted their trade restrictions against the United States. Napoleon promised to end French trade restrictions, but the French kept seizing and selling American ships. So they would seize an American ship and then sell it to somebody else and keep the money. Americans were divided on which country was worse for the United States, but Madison believed the British were the biggest threat. Settlers in the West wanted more land in the Ohio River Valley, and they were moving on to lands that were guaranteed to Native Americans by treaty with the United States. Some Native Americans renewed their contacts with the British in Canada. Tecumseh, a Shawnee chief, tried to build a confederacy amongst the Native American nations to stop white settlement on Native American lands. Tecumseh hoped that an alliance with the British would help achieve their goal. Tecumseh and his brother gained many followers and set up Prophetstown in northern Indiana, where the Tippecanoe and Wabash rivers meet. William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, was alarmed by the growing power of Tecumseh and his brother. Harrison sent Tecumseh a letter warning him that the U.S. had many more soldiers than the Native Americans did. Tecumseh replied that he did not see peace as a possibility if the U.S. kept taking Native American land. While Tecumseh was away trying to expand the Confederacy, Harrison attacked Prophetstown in the Battle of Tippecanoe. Harrison's forces won, but Tecumseh's forces ended up joining with the British. Henry Clay of Kentucky and John Calhoun of South Carolina were part of a group in Congress called the War Hawks. The War Hawks wanted to increase the nation's power, build up the military, and be more aggressive against British actions. They also wanted to expand the land of the United States, which would mean westward settlement. The Federalists of New England, however, were strongly opposed to war. By spring of 1812, Madison realized he could no longer avoid war with Britain and asked Congress for a declaration of war. So you can see where all of these parts are coming together. So you have the issues of trade between Britain and the United States and France. You have the issue of impressment with the war. You have the fact that the U.S. wants to expand west, and how Native Americans made deals with the British, and the British helped the Native Americans. So by this point, the problems between Britain and the United States have grown too great. Britain had already decided to end its policy of seizure of American ships and sailors, however, but the information did not reach the U.S. in time. And this again shows how the problem of communication, or in this case, slow communication or lack of communication, helped start a war. And that is the end of this section.